Hey y'all, it's me Alex. Today I have a review and two looks featuring the Melt Season Parties eyeshadow palette. This is new. It was released like I think 2 weeks ago. I got it when it came to Sephora. It came here surprisingly quickly. I'm a huge lover of purple eyeshadow, so of course I absolutely had to go pick this palette up. This retails for $48. You can find it at Sephora or on the Melt Cosmetics website. I think you might also be able to find it on Beauty Bay, but I've only ever shopped from Beauty Bay like twice in my entire life, so I haven't really checked it recently. So this is what it looks like. It is this monochromatic purple burgundy sort of palette. Now I was very surprised that Melt released this when they did, just because it seems kind of a more autumnal, smoky sort of color scheme, but I'm not mad about it because I love fall shades just about any time of the year. I've always found that these sorts of shades, any sort of earthy, smoky, any sort of dark sorts of shades are the most flattering on me. Those are the shades that I sort of enjoy the most. Now this is one of their smaller palettes. This is the same size as their Radioactive palette, and that means that it is smaller than the Gemini palette. I mean the Muerte palette, and also the Gemini palette, but I'm holding the Muerte palette. You'll also have to deal with a lot of lighting changes throughout this video. I'm sorry, I'm using natural light because I do think that shows the makeup a little bit better, and also because my room is small and I don't want to have a whole lighting setup on me all the time. Back to this palette. So I was very interested to kind of see how this worked. I didn't really actually watch any reviews of this before I ordered it, which was something that I was definitely theoretically planning on doing, but then like this is too exciting for me to not do that. The hype and the sort of color scheme got the better of me. I was like, purple eyeshadow, Melt, love it, gotta get it. And this is also an extension of their Season Party stack, which I do not think exists anymore. So it seems like between that and the Rust palette and the Radioactive palette, they might just be trying to phase out their stacks and make them into palettes, which I don't personally mind. So let's talk about what is actually in this palette. Firstly, the packaging I think is very beautiful. I really enjoy Melt's packaging. My favorite, of course, is from the Amor Eterno collection, and that is from the Muerte palette. I think this is my favorite Melt palette of all time. Nothing, unless they come out with a color scheme that is like better than this, which I don't think anyone can. I love this packaging. I'm really into this color scheme. As I've said before, I'm a purple eyeshadow aficionado, so I own a lot of purple shadows, some of which I have over here with me that I might try and do some comparisons. When I was looking through my collection, I did discover that I actually don't own that many shadows that are super similar to this palette, especially in the shimmer department. I do own a lot of like mauve-y, purple, burgundy type matte shades, but I really don't own that many shimmer shades from that sort of range. So my favorite shades I really like the shimmers in this one. So I love the shade Skeleton Kiss. I'm using that as an inner corner highlight on both sides, which you'll see in the demo. And I'm also using that as a face highlight. I really like it because it's sort of that opal iridescent pink shift to it. And I'm not a huge fan of bright, colorful, funky highlighters on myself. I like it on other people, not as much on myself. But when it comes to that in like a pink tone, game over. So I really like that. I also, between that and Strangelove, these two are my favorite out of this palette. Strangelove is what I have on this lid, and I like Strangelove a lot because it has the same sort of texture as the shimmer Angelito from the Muerte palette. I say this in the demo, but I feel like Melt has two different kinds of shimmers. The more metallic ones that you'll see kind of down here that are a little bit smoother, and then the sort of chunkier ones like Strangelove. And I really like both formulas. The metallics, just because those are what I used on this side, and you can really you can put it down on top of a glitter glue and really make it pop. You can just put it down on a regular base and it'll still look really nice, but give it more of a satin soft finish. And then you have shades like Strangelove that are very chunky, that are kind of silicone-y, almost have like a wet sort of ColourPop Super Shock Shadow type feeling that will always really pop on your eyes. So I really like that. Melt has fantastic shimmers. But let's talk about the mattes. So if you will have seen my first impressions using this palette, you'll know that I began with the shade Last Caress as my transition shade for that look. And one eye turned out pretty nice, but the other one I had a little bit of trouble blending. Now, I use that shade as one of my transitions in both of the looks that I have on right now. And with both of those looks, I actually began with Total Immortal as like the initial transition shade, even though it's very light. I didn't expect it to do too much, but I did want to give it a shot in my looks. But I found that actually when I put that down as my initial transition shade, once I layered Last Caress on top of that, and even on this eye I layered Mean Streak on top of that to make it even more dramatic, the mattes blended perfectly fine. I think that is a thing with Melt's matte formula, is that they do have genuinely good mattes, but in order to make the darker ones work just a little bit better, you should layer some of the lighter ones from the palette in with it. Also, I realized that like I'm resting my arm on the arm of my chair, and I should keep up the palette like this. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really like the Gemini palette and the Muerte palette, but I don't care much for the Radioactive palette, just because the darker mattes in that palette don't really have a lighter counterpart in that same sort of color range to transition it together with. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making sense. You'll see it more in the demo when I'm doing these looks. I think that this is a very good palette if you are interested in sort of purple burgundy tones. I will say that since this is more of a monochromatic palette and it's not like some of their others, you know, like the Gemini, the Muerte, the Vita palette, those are all kind of like two-toned, so you can get a lot more variety of looks. Since this is a monochromatic one, you're not going to get as many looks out of it, but I love these sorts of colors, so I know that even though I won't get a huge variety of looks out of this palette, I'm gonna love every look that I can get. So if you're a fan of these sorts of shades, I think that this is a really good palette. Just know that with the mattes, you will need to do a little bit of layering and blending and finessing with them, but I don't think that it's anything like Subculture or anything like that that's too prohibitive for one to actually make these sorts of shades work. I also do feel the need to mention, as for like the metallics down here, I really love She's in Parties, which is, I guess it's kind of the iconic shade out of this one, isn't it? The nice little burgundy one. Lost Control and Sleepwalk, I do have both of those on this eye. And I feel like effectively, unless you're someone who has a very specific eye for eyeshadow and different shades, those two could basically just end up looking the same. They could have probably done without one or the other. Like, I can notice the difference between those two shades when I apply them, but I think they could have probably gotten away with either cutting one out or replacing it with a different shade, perhaps maybe in the lighter department, so there could have been like a little bit more of a gradient, or maybe like a black matte shade I think could have also done pretty well. And it's not that I have a problem with either of those shades, it's just that, you know, they look very, very similar on the eye when you do apply them. Like I said, I notice a difference, but not enough that I think that they're both necessary. Okay, so now let's get into some comparison swatches with some other palettes that I have. So let me see where I want to begin, because obviously since I love purple eyeshadow, I have a lot of different things that I could compare this to. I'm gonna zoom y'all out just a tiny bit. Okay, I think that might be a better angle for us to do these swatches. That way you can see like more of my arm and my hand perhaps. And that way I won't be like constantly getting this side of my body out of frame. So first I want to compare the shade Skeleton Kiss here with the Melt Morning Star highlight, because I feel like even if the eyeshadow is a little bit more pigmented than the highlight, I think that they have a similar-ish effect. So let me begin. Okay, so on top we have Skeleton Kiss from the palette, and then on the bottom we have Morning Star from their just like regular highlight collection. As you can see, while they do have a similar shift, Skeleton Kiss is definitely a bit darker and a bit pinker, whereas the highlighter, while you can see a little bit of a pink shift to it, it definitely leans more on the pearly side. I wanted to also compare Strange Love, the second one, to Pink Champagne from the Anastasia Self-Made palette. I think that this one is definitely going to be a bit pinker in comparison, but I did want to see because I think that they might have very similar textures. Oh, and I accidentally just broke some of Skeleton Kiss. I'm doing great, y'all. Okay, on top we have Strange Love, and on the bottom we have Pink Champagne. Obviously Pink Champagne is a little bit more pink, but I think the two would actually pair very nicely together if I wanted to do sort of a softer look, and they do have very similar textures of their shimmer. I wanted to do a little bit of a comparison between Total Immortal, the lighter matte here, and Jellyfish from the Menagerie Violet Ink palette. In terms of monochromatic purple palettes, this is another one that I really like. This one obviously leans a little bit more on the bright cool tone side, but I just wanted to see how those line up as well. Okay, yeah, once I actually swatch them, you can really see. Yeah, there isn't as much of a similarity as I thought between those two shades. I'm also going to take a quick look at Hidden Place from the Nabla Dreamy 2 palette just to see how that compares to Strangelove as well. I think this one might be a little bit darker, but this one, the Nabla shadow has a little bit more of, I guess it's almost like a duochromy bronzy shift in addition to the light purple sort of shade. So that is kind of that difference there. As far as Last Caress goes, I'm going to compare that to Flow from the ColourPop Good Sport palette, another nice little purpley palette. And up top we have the Melt one, on the bottom we have the one from the Good Sport palette. The Melt one is definitely more of like a mauvey muted shade, whereas the ColourPop shade is a little bit more vibrant. I'm also going to compare both of those shades to this one from the Viseart Dark Mattes. The Viseart one is a little bit more of a nice in-between shade between the ColourPop and the Melt ones. And there goes my lighting change yet again. Like I mentioned, I don't have a whole lot of metallic sort of burgundy shades in my collection. I generally lean towards matte versions of those. But let me see, because I know the shade Metallic Plum from the ABH Self-Made palette, I think that one could kind of look similar to Lost Control. So let's see, shall we? Okay, so on top we have the Melt shade, and on the bottom we have the Anastasia shade. The Anastasia one is showing up a little bit, I would say more sheer, but I also know that that palette is 5 years old, whereas this one is basically brand new. So I think out of all of the ones we have so far, that is the closest dupe that I can give y'all. I did want to compare Mean Streak, that dark matte, with the shade Blackberry from the Nabla Cutie palette. I think this one is probably going to lean more brown, but I wanted to just kind of see how that would play. And also just, I haven't used this palette yet. I just got this one, and I think this is going to be maybe my next, maybe get ready with me or whatever. Okay, so on top is the Melt shade, and on the bottom is the shade from the Nabla Cutie Berry palette. And they're pretty similar. The one from Nabla is definitely goes on a little bit smoother. Nabla shadows feel a lot smoother than Melt shadows in my opinion. But I think they're pretty similar. The Melt shadow is just a little bit darker, but I think they're pretty decent dupes for one another. And that actually reminds me that if I go into the Dreamy 2 Mystic palette, I remembered offline, it looks like a matte black in the palette, but it actually comes off like an eggplant shade. So just want to see that really quickly. I think this one might be a little bit too dark. Okay, this one is a little bit darker and kind of compares to the Melt shadow a little bit more than the one from the Wildberry palette. Basically, I have a lot of similar shades in a lot of different palettes, but I don't have a whole lot of just like metallic burgundy purple shades like that. So overall, those are the sorts of shades that I'm comparing it to. I don't have a lot of palettes that are specifically like this, but those are just the sort of shades that the palette compares to. Now, I think that is a very long introduction, and y'all probably want to see how I did these eye looks, so let's just move on to that. Okay, so my eyes are primed, NYX HD Eyeshadow Primer. Y'all know the drill by now. I am going to, just so I can maximize my time and just pop out some more looks from more palettes, I'm going to do like a different look on each eye. That way you can see two different ways of using this palette in this review. I'm going to begin with this eye because that is what makes the most sense to me. I'm going to begin with Total Immortal, which is the lightest matte shade there. This one is not normally a shade that I would go for, and I'm using the e.l.f. and J. Kissa J3 brush. There's definitely a bit of kickback in the pan. I'm mostly just going to use this as a transition shade and not too much else, because I just want to see how this really plays. So I'm just popping that into my crease, and I kind of expected this to be a little bit closer to my skin tone from what I see in the pan, but I think this is a pretty nice surprise that it does actually sort of build up into something a little bit more visible, which is pretty nice. Like about one shade darker than my skin tone and just like a purple version of it. Like I could put this all over my face and be like a purple alien. That's certainly a way of describing things. I also can't tell if the lighting is changing in the video or not. It is definitely changing in this room. I think you'll know I use natural lighting, so them's the breaks, my friend. So now I'm going to go in with the shade Last Caress, which is the mid-tone purple, and y'all will know from my previous video that this one I had a little bit of trouble with. I'm using it on this BH Cosmetics brush. I'm just lightly going in and blending that into my crease to sort of deepen it up a bit. I think since we put the lighter shade down first, this is blending out a lot better than my previous experience, so I think that is quite nice. And I think that's the thing with like a lot of Melt's matte shadows, is that they're not necessarily something that a lot of looks that I do, I don't really put down a traditional transition shade. I usually just go in with a darker shade and blend it out so that it's lighter at the edges. And I think sometimes with Melt's matte formula you can't necessarily do that. So I'm thinking that was probably the issue that I was running into with it last time. And you know what, aside from like this part of this eye look, I didn't actually plan what I wanted to do. I think I want to use perhaps some of the darker shades, at least like towards the outer portion of my eyes, perhaps. You know, I think it's worth a shot. So I think I'm gonna begin with Lost Control, which is like the darkest shade in this palette. Let me just use this eyeshadow brush. I'm not using any sort of glitter glue or anything like that, just because I think this one I want to be a little bit more blended rather than cut creasy or halo-y or anything like that. And so I'm just going to put that down towards the outer corner of my eye. Perhaps maybe even leaning towards kind of the outer half of my lid. Okay, so this is going on pretty nicely. If you don't, I'm obviously, like I said, I'm not using any sort of like glitter glue or anything like that, so it comes down as a little bit more of a satin shade rather than something super metallic, but I don't necessarily mind that. That's one of the things that I like about Melt's shimmers. There's a significant price difference between Melt Cosmetics and e.l.f. Cosmetics, but I think that is one of the things that I really enjoy about Melt shimmers. It seems like they have two different shimmer formulas, one that can go from like a satin to a metallic depending on what sort of base you use, and then they have like their very thick, chunky, silicone-y type shimmers, and I really, really enjoy them both. Okay, and now I'm thinking for the inner portion of the eye look, I'm going to go in with Sleepwalk, which is a little bit lighter, a little bit more burgundy than Lost Control. And I want to see really if there is any sort of difference between these two shades and how they apply. Okay, so I don't know how much you can tell on camera, but you can definitely see a shift between those two shades, especially when you just kind of blend it down the middle like that. And then I'm just going to go back with more of Last Caress just to sort of blend out the crease. Yeah, I'm thinking this is looking pretty good. This is blending pretty easily. The other thing about Melt shadows that really helps them blend is they do monochromatic like color gradients very nicely, and so they just always provide just like some very, very nice blending with that. Let's move on to that lower lash line, shall we? I think I'm going to basically kind of mimic what I'm doing in the crease for this, so I'm going to go back in with more of Total Immortal here and just sort of make that kind of my lower lash line transition shade. And then I'm just going to use Last Caress a little bit closer to my lower lash line. And as you can see, those two apply and blend very nicely, just like they did in the crease. Okay, so it is inner corner highlight time. I think I'm just going to do the same inner corner highlight on both sides because I think that the shade Skeleton Kiss, I love this shade so much. I just want to use that on both sides. That way if I go out later today, which I'm probably not going to, but like if I go out for a walk or something, Both eyes will look similar enough that I won't get too many weird looks if I do something really different on this eye. So this is eye look number 1 done. Let's move on to this eye. I think I want to do a little bit of a halo eye on this side. So I think since there are only so many mattes in this palette and the sort of transitioning that I did with this eye worked so well, I'm going to begin in that same way on this eye, but we're going to deepen it up, do a little halo eye, lots of contrast, which is what I really enjoy. So you can get something, you know, a little bit simple and easy and smoky on this eye, but something a little bit more complex and dramatic on this eye. So we're going to begin with Total Immortal. Again, once again, same brush, same e.l.f. and J.Kiss J3 brush, and let's transition it up. And this time I'm kind of blending it into the outer and inner corners just a bit, so that way when we layer it up with the other shades for a halo eye, we'll have a bit of an easier time. And then back in with that same BH Cosmetics brush, same shade, Last Caress here, and instead of just like using that to deepen it up, I'm going to begin at the inner and outer corners. And just kind of slowly blend that into my crease. And I'm just going to go back with a little bit more of Total Immortal just so I can really blow it up there. I really like a good blown out halo eye when I do it, like very precise with the shimmer in the center, but very like blown out on the lid, if that makes sense, like in the crease and all of that. I don't know if my words are actually making sense. I'm still not entirely used to talking to people, if we're being honest about this whole quarantine type situation, but hey, I think that's where we're all at, if we're being honest. Now, since I want to also use the darkest matte shade, sorry, the car outside distracted me, I'm going to go in with Mean Streak on an even smaller BH Cosmetics blending brush. And I'm just very lightly going to go in with that on the outer and inner corner. Again, just deepening it up even more. And the more you work with it, the more you can just slowly blend that into the crease. Then I'll just take more of Last Caress, the mid-tone, and blend that out. Just all of the matte shades work very well together when you use each other, like you use each shade to blend out the other, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's move on to that sort of halo eye part that I normally do. So I'm going to begin with the e.l.f. glitter glue, and I don't know why I just squirted out so much on my hand. I'm literally only doing one eye with this. And I am just beginning that where I want the crease to cut, up here, and just taking it all the way down as I go. Just like that, kind of doing a windshield wiper motion to spread the glitter glue out decently far, maybe a little bit over the matte, but not so far that you won't be able to blend out the edges of the shade. And the shade that I really want to use is actually one of the most interesting shades to me in this palette, and that is Strange Love here. And I have a really weird lighting change in this video. I really don't know what to do with that. So I'm just carefully placing that first at the top of where the glitter glue is. And again, that using that same windshield wiper motion. And this one is one of the more chunky glitters from Melt, so this one is providing a lot more kick up because I'm also a menace when it comes to the way that I pick up shadows, so this is what that is looking like right now. And then I'm just going to use more of Mean Streak to sort of blend out the inner and outer corner with this. And I think that is a pretty good look as far as this eye goes. I think I might have brought up the shimmer shade a little bit too far, so I'm going to kind of just try and very lightly deepen up the crease portion just so you know, I can have a little bit more contrast up there, but other than that, I think this looks pretty nice. Let me think about what I want to do on the lower lash line, because I know that I still have one shade in this palette that I haven't used. I think I'll begin with Last Caress on the lower lash line, and then layer She's in Parties on top of it just so I can use it. I'm using the same brush that I used for She's in Parties in my crease. Or no, Last Caress in my crease, whatever. And as you can see, since I just used Last Caress instead of the combination of that and Total Immortal, this lower lash line is definitely a little bit on the smokier side, which I don't mind. And I think that that shade actually works just fine as a lower lash line sort of blown out look. It just has a little bit of trouble when you use it on its own in the crease. And then I'm just going to take the Elf & Jake Hissa J4 brush and use the shade She's in Parties sort of close to the lower lash line. And then just so it lines up with this eye, I'm going to use the shade Skeleton Kiss as my inner corner highlight. Okay, so I'm really happy with both of these eyes. I'm going to go in and do the rest of my face so that way I can like film the entire rest of this video. So I'll be right back. Okay, and that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you like this new format that I'm kind of trying to do to get, you know, a little bit more content out and do a few more looks all at once. So I hope you like that. If you liked it, you should give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos from me like this and like other sorts of videos where I talk a bit more, you can subscribe down below, and I hope you'll have a wonderful day. Bye!